Welcome to this module of Professor Messer's free CompTIA A+ certification training course. I'm James Messer, and in this module we're going to talk to you all about operating systems. This comes from our CompTIA exam 220-601. This is the Essentials exam, and in section 3.1 we need to identify the fundamentals of using operating systems. We're going to not only talk about why an operating system is important, but I'm going to give you a little tour of Apple macOS, Linux, and Microsoft Windows. These are all different operating systems, and we're going to look at what's different about them and what's similar about all three of those operating systems. First, let's talk about why you would want an operating system to begin with. If you've gone through the first number of videos of this course, we've talked about memory and hard drives and installing a motherboard. And let's say that you did all of that. You put together your own computer system. You had all of these different components all ready to go, and then you turn the power switch on, and it doesn't do anything. It just sits there and stares at you because it doesn't know what to do with all this hardware that you put in front of it. You have to have an operating system if you want anything to happen. This is what's going to allow you, the human being, to interact with this piece of hardware, and so that this operating system needs to know how to interoperate with the memory that you've installed, with the hard drives that are inside of your system, and all of these other components that you've plugged into this piece of hardware. It's very important that we have that operating system to do that. The operating system is also a common platform that application developers use to create software. So if you're using your browser, or if you're using a word processor or a spreadsheet, there's a developer behind the scenes who has written his software specifically for that operating system. And that's the only operating system that particular executable, that application will run on. And so you're planning to do anything with your computer, you're going to need this common platform in which to run your applications. And finally, us human beings need some way to interact with this piece of hardware that we have there. Most of the time these days in operating systems, we have a user interface. There's a mouse, there's graphics on the keyboard, there's graphics on the screen. We can click a lot of different buttons and do a lot of different things. It's that user interface that makes the entire user experience valuable for us and allows us to do things on our computer. The hardware itself can't do everything. There has to be a piece of software to be able to get everything up and running and allow you to interact with this system, and that's what your operating system is there for. As you go from operating system to operating system, there are a number of features that you're going to find are almost identical between them, certainly identical in the way that they're operating. For instance, file management. If you want to save a document that you've created, if you want to retrieve it, if you want to rename it, there has to be some mechanism in the operating system to be able to facilitate that. And so you'll find as we go through this tour of operating systems, that file management will be one of the things that we look at. You'll also notice a very common application support platform in each one of these operating systems. Now, each OS works a little bit differently at this level. The memory management, the way the swap files are used, and when they're used are different, whether you're looking at Apple Macintosh, whether you're looking at Linux, or looking at Windows. But the underlying purpose of having that available is still the same. It's to provide support for these applications to work on this desktop. We also have, in every operating system, a standard way to interact with the input and the output available to us. So if we have printers and keyboards and hard drives and USB keys and anything else that would get data into this system and data out of this system, the operating system provides us ways to interact, to add hard drives, to remove hard drives, to add memory sticks, to take things out, so that we're able to not only get information into the hardware, the computer that we've created, but also out of that device. And finally, the operating system itself needs configuration tools, there's management tools, there's preferences that you can install. And so every operating system has its own way of doing things along those lines so that you can customize the user experience specifically for you. Let's talk first about Apple macOS. This is an operating system that was created by Apple for its Macintosh line of computers. It's now on version 10. You'll often hear this referred to as Mac OS X, the X being that Roman numeral for 10. The previous versions, obviously, Mac OS 8, Mac OS 9. And if you look at the version numbers on the Macintosh itself, it does refer to the version as a decimal 10 in the operating system itself. Whenever we talk about these operating systems, especially from the ones from Apple on their Macintosh line, you'll also hear them referred to as these names of cats. So you hear it referred to as Panther or Tiger or Leopard, depending on what version of operating system it is. And often Apple will give you an idea of what's coming. For instance, in about the June timeframe of 2009, we expect that Apple will have their next version 10.6 of OS X available, and they are calling that one Snow Leopard. So when somebody says, oh, I've got a Macintosh and I'm running Leopard, That's what they're referring to, is that version of the number that's on there. Now, keep in mind, although we're going through looking at these different operating systems, there are no questions on the CompTIA A+ exam specific to Mac OS. This is really an overview of operating systems that I'm giving you. It's going to give you some insight into how these things work in Windows and why they're important, but you're not going to have any specific questions towards Apple or Macintosh operating systems anywhere on the exam. This is the Mac OS X desktop, and if we look around, we can see things that we're going to find very similar in other operating systems that we work with. For instance, on the screen itself are a set of menus somewhere on the screen, and the menus here are something called the Finder. This is our desktop that allows us to, as the name implies, find different things on our system. So if we click on our applications list, we can see the applications that are available to us, and we can browse through these and decide that we'd like to run something, connect to iTunes, run our Safari browser. That looks like a good idea. Let's run Safari, and then we can connect that on the internet and do the normal browsing that we happen to do. And we've also got across the bottom of our screen a toolbar. So if we wanted to very quickly find those things, we could do that as well. Notice that the windows themselves, I can grab a title bar on the window and move it around. There's some buttons that allow me to minimize, maximize, and close the windows out completely. And you can see that I've got a lot of flexibility in how to work with this operating system. As I move through the different applications, you'll also notice that menus come up that are specific to the application that I'm using. So you'll notice Safari is listed here as the browser, and I've got other things I can do with Safari. If I return to my Finder by clicking on that window, you'll notice the Finder has a completely different set of menus. So the operating system provides us with a different user interface depending on what application we happen to be using at any particular time. If I want to go to my system drive itself, I've got a little graphic here of a hard drive, and I can go right into the hard drive and start looking around at other things that I happen to have in my system and look at different files that I've saved, that I've loaded. I can take documents and put them into different folders, transfer them out over my network. So a lot of different options available. Notice I've got options in the top of the screen to show me my date and time. I can customize these views on my screen. I've got search built in. I've got some feedback on whether the audio is enabled or not. Those are the types of things I, as a human being, would like to see in my operating system, and it makes the entire user interface experience a lot easier for me as I go through and need to do my daily work. I don't have to worry about finding different things, identifying what I'm doing. Very graphical, and you can even see the icons themselves provide instant feedback on what this happens to be. If it looks like a folder, it is a folder. If it looks like a document, it is a document. And so I now have an easier way to work around this operating system. That's something we'll see as we go from operating system to operating system, are all of these similarities with those pieces. The screen might look a little different, but we'll see that there's some things that are very common as we step through them. As you probably can tell from that very short tour of the Macintosh operating system, it's very easy to use. It's very graphical. It's very simple to use. In fact, oftentimes when we have a family member or someone who wants to use a computer, they want to buy a computer, they want to surf the web and do a few other things, but they're not really computer savvy. Very often we in the industry say, why don't you get a Macintosh? Very simple to use. It is very compatible with almost everything that comes out for an Apple Macintosh because the hardware is tightly contained within Apple. The only people who make Apple hardware is Apple. The only people who make devices that plug into these pieces of Apple hardware are people who have been checked off by Apple and have confirmed that the devices are going to work properly. There's also, from relative to every other operating system out there, fewer security concerns. There are still security concerns out there, but it's nothing like the environments that we might have on a Linux desktop and certainly not on a Windows desktop. We'll talk about that more in a moment. The disadvantages of the Macintosh operating system is that there is less industry support than the PC platforms. Estimates are 7 to 10% of the total number of installed systems out there in the world are from Apple. Everything else is a PC-type platform for the most part. And so because there's that smaller percentage, there is fewer amounts of industry support. Apple tries to overcompensate by that by providing customer support that is well beyond what you might expect to find in any other manufacturer. And the costs of these, because they are proprietary systems created by Apple that you can't buy anywhere else, do have a higher relative cost for both the hardware and the software. And Apple's response usually to that is that it's an easier operating system. You're not only paying for better hardware, but perhaps you're also paying for better support and a system that you know is going to work right out of the box. Very nice operating system in Mac OS. There's just no questions about it on the CompTIA exam. Another popular operating system out there is one called Linux. And Linux is what we call a Unix compatible software operating system. The Unix compatible is very important because Linux and Unix almost look and sound alike. Linux was created to be a compatible operating system with Unix. Unix being an operating system that was created originally by AT&T and a number of other folks. What Linux was designed to be everything that Unix was, even to the compatibility level, but instead it is absolutely free. It's portable, it's powerful, you can use it in a lot of different operating systems, and it really is free. This is an open source piece of software. It is an extremely powerful open source piece of software that has really changed the landscape with operating systems because you can download it from the internet, get it installed in your system, and it's surprising just how easy and powerful this operating system really is. When you go out there to look for downloading Linux, you can't just download Linux, you download what's called a distribution of Linux, which is a number of pieces that have been put together and compiled into a distribution set that is usually specific to what you're trying to do. There are distributions that are general use. There are some distributions that are designed for server environments, others designed for web servers, others designed for gaming. Just depends on what you want to do. There's some very popular ones out there. Ubuntu is the one that usually we tell our family members to go download because it's designed for the home. There's also server versions of Ubuntu. There's other distributions called Debian. There's Red Hat and Fedora. Fedora is the one that I'm going to show you today, and it's a very common one on the internet because it's not only a popular distribution, but it's one that is supported by an organization, a company called Red Hat, which also has enterprise versions of the operating system available. So it's nice that there's a free one there as well. Let me give you a tour of Linux and show you what we mean by this easy to use and powerful operating system. This is just one of the types of desktops that you can have on your Linux system. This is one that comes out of the box from Fedora. So this is Red Hat Fedora that I'm running on my desktop. And you can see a number of the things on our screen are very similar to the things we saw on the Macintosh operating system. There is a toolbar across the top that we can use to look at menus. Instead of having a toolbar across the bottom to choose the applications, we have our options here that we can choose to look at and start different web browsers, different configurations, different office settings. And that's usually where we go to first when we're ready to launch our applications. There are icons on the desktop. They have also the ability to customize a number of these panels. So if we'd like to add different pieces to this panel, if you'd like to have a clock there so that it's always available, you simply add the clock to this, and now you've got a clock up at the top. So you can see very graphical and very easy to use. There are also multiple desktops here at the bottom. These are called virtual desktops, and I can move between them by clicking. So you don't have to clutter up your screen all at the same time with everything you happen to be doing. You can have one desktop set up for your word processing, one desktop set up for your graphics editing, another for your video work that you're doing, and it's all done from here. One of the things we said was very common throughout all operating systems is there needs to be a way to interact with the files that you store on your system. And in the Macintosh operating system, we saw the Finder. In our Linux distribution, I have a file browser here that's called Nautilus. It allows us to see the different folders that are on our screen and the different files that we happen to have available. And I can go into any of these. I can open the file, I can move it, I can rename it, I can send it to my trash. And these are the types of very easy to use interfaces that now allow me to interact with the operating system and move the files around on my hard drive. I don't have to know very specific command lines, statements to be able to rename or change things on the hard drive. I simply go to my list on my screen and I choose what I would like to change. So you can see here a lot of similarities to what we saw before, but of course there are differences in the operating systems and the way that they work. So let's talk about what the advantage and disadvantages might be for using Linux. As we mentioned earlier, Linux is very powerful. One of the nice advantages of it is not only is it powerful in what it does, but it's absolutely free. You can download it from the internet today, install it on your machine, and start using it immediately. It also works on a very wide variety of software. So whether you have an older laptop, an older desktop, or something that's brand new, there's probably a set of drivers in the operating system or some that are available for Linux that you can load up and use the existing hardware that you happen to have. So one of the advantages of running this on older systems is that it doesn't require a lot of resources and it'll run really well even on older hardware. There's also a very passionate and very active user community. So if there isn't an operating system driver for what you're looking for, very often can go to a website and ask the people on the website, is there a driver? Have somebody found another driver that worked just as well? Or is anybody developing a driver? And you can assist them in the actual development process of creating that driver and help test it. Now, the disadvantages of Linux is that when you get into very specific hardware, especially on newer laptops, which have very specific embedded type hardware in those systems for the video, for the audio, you'll sometimes have limited driver support available. So you may find that the hardware that you have may not be 100% compatible with Linux. You may have to find some workarounds to get around some of those capabilities. There are also limited support options. Because this operating system is free, there's sometimes not very many places you can go when you have a problem other than the online user community. This is why organizations like Red Hat exist, because they have an enterprise version of Linux that you can buy from them, and you can have ongoing support. And so they'll make sure that the Linux configuration that you've put into your large environment or your large organization is also something you can call someone on the phone and say, I'm having a problem, can you help me? And they'll help you out with some of those specific issues. One thing to remember is that there are no Linux specific questions on the CompTIA exam. It's nice to know that Linux is there. You'll probably want to play around with it as part of what you're doing in your normal day-to-day. But for the purposes of the A+ certification, there are no Linux specific questions that you'll have to worry about. The vast majority of systems today are running Microsoft Windows, and a huge emphasis of the CompTIA exams, especially the operating system part, deal primarily with Microsoft Windows. We're going to talk about Windows because it is a major market presence. About 90% of the systems, 85 to 90% of the systems that are installed out there have some version of Windows on it. There are many different versions of Windows that you're going to see. If you start looking around in any enterprise or larger organization, you're going to see a lot of these that are already running out there. Windows 2000 is the first one that we'll talk about for the CompTIA exam. There are previous versions that we'll discuss in other video modules when it comes to upgrading and installing, but Windows 2000 came in 4 different flavors. There's a Windows 2000 Professional, there's a Windows 2000 Server, an Advanced Server, and a Data Center Server. There's also Windows XP, which is probably today the most popular version of Microsoft Windows that's out there. There are also a number of Windows XP versions available: XP Professional, Home, Media Center, and 64-bit versions of Windows XP. There's also the brand new version of Microsoft's operating system called Vista. I say brand new, but it's been out for well over a year now. And there's many different versions of that operating system as well: a Home Basic, a Home Premium, a Business version, an Enterprise version, and an Ultimate version. There are also other types of Windows operating systems you'll see out there: Windows Server 2003 and Windows Server 2008, certainly extensively used in large enterprises because they're designed to be servers that many people, hundreds of people even, might be accessing simultaneously or running Windows applications from over the network. These are often used in many environments as web servers. So some of the web servers you hit on the internet may be running Windows Server 2003 or Windows Server 2008. There, you'll also find some other Windows versions that are out there. If you've ever seen these tablet type systems that have a stylus that people are typing on, that's using a specialized version of Windows. The version of Windows that runs on people's mobile devices, their phones, the PDA type devices, are running a special version of Windows called Windows Mobile. So it depends on what Windows is being used for the specific operating system version that's available or loaded on that device. And although there are similarities with all of these, there are also a number of differences. The emphasis that we'll go through for the CompTIA exam are really focusing on Windows 2000 and Windows XP, and very specifically the desktop versions of those things. This is the Windows XP operating system, and very much like the operating system we've already looked at, the desktop is very similar to what we've already had here. For instance, there's a clock on the bottom. We can see exactly what time it happens to be. We can see a number of applications are here. Instead of having a toolbar across the top or bottom, in Windows we have a start menu that gives us access to our programs and to our other devices. And if we'd like to access the files that are on our system, there's a My Computer icon here at the top that then allows us access into the other files and programs and applications that we happen to have. So when we need to move a file, rename a file, again, it's this graphical front end that allows us to have access into that operating system. And as we go through the next set of videos, you're going to learn a lot about Microsoft Windows and how to do a lot with these tools from our local disk view, where we can look at these files, all the way into understanding exactly how the operating system works under the surface. There are a number of advantages to running Microsoft Windows. One of the advantages is that there is a large industry support for Windows. With the vast majority of systems running Windows out there, it certainly makes sense that there's going to be a lot of people that help you support it. And this certification is, for an example, one of the ways that the industry is supporting this operating system. Because it is so supported in such a broad way, there's also a broad selection of operating system options. You can run on a lot of different pieces of hardware from many different manufacturers. And there's also a lot of different kinds of software that you can run on your Windows platform, certainly more than any other operating system that's out there. Now, because there is this large install base, one of the disadvantages of Windows, and things you certainly have heard of through the years, are the security problems that you might find when you're running Windows. So a lot of the hackers and the people trying to get control of your system know that the vast majority of systems out there is running Windows, so they're going to go first after the largest group, and that's the people who are running Windows. There's also such a large base of hardware out there made by so many different manufacturers that if you're ready to integrate a piece of hardware, you may find that it's sometimes a challenge because there are hundreds of different video cards, hundreds of different audio cards out there, and every audio card driver is a little bit different and has a little bit different level of support associated with it. Sometimes you have to try a lot of different things before you find the piece of hardware and the software driver that goes along with it that's going to work perfect in the device, the piece of hardware, the laptop or the desktop that you've purchased for your use. And that can certainly create some challenges sometimes to get these devices integrated. Part of what we're doing in this set of videos is to give you information on how you can find out if your hardware is going to work or not, how those drivers can work for you, and if the operating system is going to support what you're trying to do. So that's a review of operating systems, why you might want an operating system, and we've given you an overview of the Apple Macintosh OS, the Linux, and the Microsoft Windows operating systems. For much more, plenty of videos, lots of communication in our message boards, and much more, you can visit our website, freeaplus.com.